Welcome to the lecture on the Introduction to the Institutional Analysis and Development Framework. My name is Marco Janssen. I'm a professor in the School of Sustainability at Arizona State University. And I'm also the director of the Center for Behavior, Institutions and the Environment. In this lecture, I will focus on the governance of shared resources. How do communities manage their resources such as forest, water, fish and grazing areas? We will see that there is a large diversity in solutions to this problem. Successful solutions are often tailored to the social and biophysical context, and therefore we use a framework, the IAD framework, to analyze the problem. We will first provide a broader background to the type of problems we are studying before we focus on institutions. We continue with the description of the IAD framework and illustrate it with various examples. The types of problems we focus on are collective action problems. In many situations where people share resources, there is a conflict between what is beneficial to the individual and what is beneficial to the group. Suppose a number of herders share a meadow and they have each a number of sheep. Each individual herder will benefit from adding an extra sheep and claim the extra benefits from this extra sheep. But the damage of this extra sheep, the reduction of the amount of grass, is shared among all herders. If the herders would act as selfish, rational individuals, they will all put as many sheep on the land as possible. But this will lead to overharvesting of the common resource. In a famous essay, Gerd Hardin used this example to show that when people share a common resource, this will lead to overharvesting. The situation is known as the tragedy of the commons, and according to Hardin, there are two possible solutions. One solution is to privatize the resource so that each individual resource user manages its own property. The second solution is to have strict external regulations, such as permits or licenses from an external authority, such as the federal government. Are people really trapped if they share a common resource? Are privatization and governmental regulation the only solutions available? What is the evidence if we look at many cases? Since the 1980s, there has been a lot of collaborative research to create databases on what is happening all over the world. Elinor Ostrom, depicted in the photo, was one of the leading figures of this synthesis. She wrote an influential book published in 1990, which demonstrates that there are many cases around the world where people are able to govern their resources in a sustainable way without external regulations. Self-governance is not necessarily the best solution in each situation, but if it happens, it is often effective and efficient. The work of Ostrom was devoted to understand why this is the case, and she received in 2009 a Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for her work. In this lecture, we focus on one specific element of her work, namely the IAD framework. With self-governance, we refer to the situation where a group of people share a common resource, such as forest, fish, water, etc., and overcome the tragedy of the commons. This can be done by developing institutional arrangements, norms and rules to regulate the use of the resource among themselves. When can which people have access to the resource, for how long, and with which equipment? What is the implication of finding that people can govern shared resources in a sustainable way? Well, if there is a group of people that is able to self-govern their commons, don't overrule their institutions. They may have developed some effective solutions which may not be in line with governmental regulations, but that doesn't mean that we need to get rid of those traditional solutions. A community approach can work in the right conditions, but that doesn't mean that community approaches are the solution to everything. Sometimes we need to use governmental regulation or privatization. So the big question is, what are the right conditions in which self-governance may work? The brilliance of Ostrom was her ability to see structure in the many cases she got to know about. It helped her to detect regularities, but also demonstrates a deep appreciation for the complexity of problems research users need to overcome to craft effective institutions. I will now show some examples of case studies and then continue with the language of concepts and frameworks Ostrom developed to understand such cases. Domesticated animals, like cows and sheep, are hauled by humans to derive products like meat, milk, wool, and leather. To be productive, humans need to move cattle around to locations where they can graze. This leads to problems to be solved. Because of seasonal temperature differences or rainfall variation, there might not be one piece of land where the cattle can graze on for the whole year. As such, the owners have to find a solution for the cattle to continue eat grass. They can bring the cattle to another location, but then they need to get access to the land. Or they can collect grass during good times and save it for bad times. The picture on the left is an example of cows in Switzerland, where there are a lot of farmers who are still practicing traditional ways of farming in mountainous areas. During the summer, they bring the cows to the common meadows in the mountains. The village will share the land for grazing and will have a few individuals from the village taking care of the cows. During the winter, the cows are in the valley in indoor facilities of the individual farmers. Farmers can only have as many cows grazing on the common land during the summer as they can support themselves during the winter. Another example is grazing of sheep in mountainous areas in India. The owners of the sheep migrate during the year over large distances to places where there is food and where they can get access to land. In fact, to get access to the land to graze, sheep are allowed on the land after the harvest of crops and eat the leftovers from the land, in exchange for the manure the sheep leave behind. Hence, the sheep herders who do not own land still have access to a wide variety of grazing opportunities during the year. These two examples show that biophysical context can have a lot of influence on the kind of arrangements people come up with. A well-studied example of self-governance in the USA is the lobster fishery of Maine. In the 1920s, the fishery almost collapsed due to overfishing. During this time, the fishermen developed some new rules related to the size of the lobster. This led to the protection of the reproductive female population. Furthermore, there were local groups of fishers, often related to specific local harbors, who were protecting where fishing traps could be placed. In the figure on the right, you see a red and blue line. The red line is the harvest of the lobster, which keep going up due to good management of the lobster population. The blue line is the catch of cod, which has collapsed in the early 1990s. Due to the collapse of the cod population, the lobster population also lost a predator. Currently, the lobster fishers still fish using their own rules in a successful way. This example shows that not all fisheries lead to a tragedy of the commons. In 1990, Elinor Ostrom published a book where she was trying to answer why some communities are more successful than others in governing their common resources. She found there are regularities, and we will focus in this lecture on the intellectual framework she used to study those case studies. A key issue in the analysis of Ostrom is the study of institutions. With institutions, we refer to the norms and rules people use to regularize the interactions they have with each other. More precisely, institutions are the prescriptions that humans use to organize all forms of repetitive and structured interactions, including those within families, neighborhoods, markets, firms, sport leagues, churches, private associations, and governments at all scales. A shorter version is that institutions are the set of rules actually used by a set of individuals to organize repetitive activities. There is a lot of diversity of norms and rules we are using for the same repetitive situation in different parts of the world. The institutional analysis and development framework that I will discuss in the remainder of this lecture is a tool that helps to analyze the complexity of the situations for which people create rules and norms. How do we start to unravel the complexity of the many empirical examples that we come across? Ostrom provides the IAD framework as a systematic way to analyze the situation at hand. It provides you with a set of questions. It does not provide you with a set of solutions. Ostrom is known to warn against panaceas. Some scholars may have an ideology of what is the best solution for each problem. Ostrom argues that this is not very productive and we first have to understand the problem. The focal point for analysis using the IAD framework is the action situation. This is the place where multiple actors are interacting. This could be the parliament or Congress where elected representatives debate about new policies and regulations. It could be traffic where cars and other vehicles are interacting to go from A to B, following the traffic laws and physical space available for the vehicles on the road. Not all action situations take place in the physical world. In fact, an action situation can take place in a virtual world where people are interacting, for example, via their Facebook page. A market is also an action situation where we have buyers and sellers coming to arrangement to exchange of ownership of goods and services that are for sale. An action situation also takes place on the sports field. When two teams are confronting each other in a sport match, this is an action situation where the participants will be confronted with each other with various rules and norms. Finally, the classroom is an action situation. We have the instructor and the students interacting to learn and teach. To facilitate the learning experience, there are rules and norms, many of them discussed in the syllabus. The action situation is defined by the rules and norms that hold for that situation. But with different people in action situations, we may get different outcomes. The combination of an action situation and participants is called an action arena. If an instructor teaches two classes with the same material, the dynamics in both classes might differ because students in both classes differ, and this may lead to different types of interactions and outcomes. We now introduce the institutional analysis and development framework. We have the action arena in the center, and this is influenced by various exogenous variables, which we discuss in the next slides in more detail. The outcomes of the action arena can be evaluated by certain criteria. In Congress, the outcomes could be the passing of a certain legislation. In a sport match, it's the winning or losing of a game. And in a class, grades are typically used as a way to quantify the outcome of the learning experience. We will now zoom in to certain elements of the IAD framework. For the exogenous variables, we now distinguish the biophysical conditions, the attributes of the community and the rules in use. This will help to understand what may happen in the action arena. Fishing on a lake in Canada in the winter is not the same as fishing in the same lake in the summer. The seasonal climate causes different biophysical conditions which may impact the rules and norms that are used in the action situation. Ice fishing is not quite the same as fishing on a boat. The same rules of baseball are used, but a school team may not have the same performance as a professional team since the attributes of the participants are different. Finally, we focus on the rules in use when we analyze the action arena. Think about traffic laws. Are all those rules followed perfectly? You may know that in practice, people may get a little bit faster than official speed limits, and that is expected you follow those practices to be a good citizen on the road. The focus on rules in use is important to be reminded of. Rules can be written down in official documents, but if participants do not know them or do not understand them, they may not be followed. So to understand what is happening in an action situation, we focus on the rules people actually use in an action situation, not what they should officially use. The biophysical context provides constraints on what is physically possible. We can come up with rules that people don't have to obey the law of gravity, but such a regulation will not have much impact. The participants bring beliefs, skills, knowledge and expertise to an action situation. Do the participants know each other? Are they from the same culture, or do they speak different languages? To solve problems together in an action arena will be easier if people understand each other and trust each other. So how do we apply the IAD framework? As mentioned before, the IAD framework helps to ask questions. Who are the participants? And what are their roles? What is the biophysical context? And how do this prevent or stimulate cooperation? What are the attributes of the community? And are there signs of possible conflicts? What are the rules in use? And do they stimulate or not sustainable use of the resource? What are the outcomes that are important for the different types of participants in the action situation? So let's look at an example. The IAD framework is helpful to understand differences between cases. If you have experienced traffic in both India and the USA, you may have noticed there are many differences. The quality of the roads, the biophysical context are better in most situations in the USA, where in India there are many dirt roads and many potholes. There are major differences in the attributes of the community. On a typical highway in the US, you only find cars, while in India you find, besides cars, also pedestrians, motorcycles, bicycles, cows and other livestock. Although traffic laws are not perfectly followed in the US, there is a lot of regularity on the roads. In India, the official traffic rules seem not to matter that much. There's a lot of honking to signal where people are, and people make maximal use of the empty space on the road, irrespective which direction the traffic is supposed to go on that part of the road. Due to those differences of external variables, it's not a surprise that action arenas are very different in India and the US. As somebody who is used to drive in the USA, I'm not prepared to participate in traffic in India. I do not know the rules in use. I do not know how to interact with the other participants on the road to drive safely. It will require a major adaptation to get used to that new situation. To summarize this lecture, communities are able to govern their shared resources in a sustainable way, but it depends on the social and biophysical situation, whether communities are able to overcome effective institutional arrangements. A lot of research focuses on the specifics of those contextual variables. The IAD framework will not provide you with a solution, only with questions. As Ostrom repeated over and over again, there are no panaceas for successful governance, but there are ways to study the situation at hand and do an effective diagnosis of the problem in order to craft local solutions. I recognize that this lecture only scratched the surface of the literature about this topic. If you want to know more, I recommend you to visit the website of Sustaining the Commons.